Welcome everyone. This is Jamie Bell. I'm the project director for the Center for Advancement of Informal Science Education, CASE. We're the resource center for the NSF Advancing Informal STEM Learning program. And together here with our colleagues at the Association of Science Technology Centers, ASTC, are conducting this webinar today with the program officers, Monya Ruffin and Catherine Eberbach, who we thank for the opportunity to be able to present this webinar. There's many rich opportunities in the new solicitation that you'll learn about today, and this is the first of a series of webinars we'll be doing to help the community understand the opportunities in the solicitation and how to use some of our resources to develop projects and proposals. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Grace Troxel, who's our digital librarian and is conducting the webinar today with the program officers. Thank you.
Okay, and I'm going to pass control over to Monya.
Thank you. This is Monya Ruffin, and I'm joined by my colleague Catherine Eberbach, and we are going to provide the webinar for you today and share a great deal of information with you about our program solicitation and other critical information for those of you who may be interested in submitting a proposal to us. So thank you for joining us for this ASEL program overview webinar. As some of you may know, the Advancing Informal STEM Learning program is housed within the Directorate for Education and Human Resources in the Division of Research on Learning in Formal and Informal Settings at the National Science Foundation. It is the only program within the foundation that specifically and only targets STEM learning within informal context. Our agenda today will focus on the ASEL program, solicitation, audience types, the proposal review process, resources, and we'll also provide you with contact information. We'll briefly describe other NSF opportunities within the informal science program that you may be interested in as well. As some of you know, the ASEL program was previously called the Informal Science Education Program. The name was expanded and changed in recent years to the Advancing Informal STEM Learning Program. Through the name change, we wanted to signal to the field that we have a particular interest in A, advancing knowledge through innovative research and approaches, and not just supporting standard informal science education projects. Secondly, we're also interested, as always, in informal learning. That is, learning within the context of out-of-school time, non-formal school day experiences. The primary impacts and outcomes should occur within informal environments like after-school programs, science centers, television and radio programming, access outside of the school day, and many others. Other primary impacts and outcomes should or could directly impact professional or public engagement in STEM learning, again, outside of traditional formal schooling systems. For instance, if your project involves parents or mentoring programs, you want to ask yourself, where is the impact? What learning outcomes are you intending to measure, and to what end? Thirdly, our previous name focused on science. We expanded the name to include engineering, technology, and mathematics, and therefore STEM. We're also interested in the social and behavioral sciences as well. Finally, we are still very much interested in all aspects of learning and learning outcomes within informal STEM learning contexts. Now, let's talk about the ASEL program and solicitation. We begin with the ASEL priorities. We have 6 priorities within the ASEL program. all helping to achieve our goals within the AISL program, such as advancing new approaches to an advanced-based understanding of STEM learning in informal environments, providing multiple pathways for broadening participation, advancing innovative research and assessment for STEM learning in informal, and then also engaging the public of all ages in learning STEM in informal environments. To achieve these goals, we have 6 priorities. Our first priority is maximizing strategic impacts. Notice the word strategic. We include this purposefully because we are very much interested in impacts that have been planned, that are intended, and that are focused. So that's where the word strategic comes from in the maximizing strategic impact. We're looking for projects where the impact goes beyond project level impact. Please note that strategic impact can be achieved regardless of the size of the organization or the population of the communities that are being served, and then finally the size of the target audience. Another AISL priority is enhancing knowledge building. So this is, how does the project advance the knowledge base of the informal STEM learning field? Investigators may want to consider, for example, these types of questions when thinking about enhancing knowledge building. What is happening? To what extent? Why? How? What works for whom and under what circumstances? Projects should build from the current literature and practice. Projects may also consider building from or critiquing relevant research agendas or literatures about informal STEM learning that have been developed in recent years. Definitions of research and evaluation vary across the field of informal STEM education. It is not the goal of this solicitation to set definitions for these approaches, but instead the AISL program seeks to advance the collective understanding of learning STEM in informal environments and to provide appropriate means for communicating what has been learned. Thus, each proposal should identify how it builds knowledge. It should make a case for how it is doing so, using appropriate resources from research and evaluation, which my colleague will speak with you more about later during this webinar. The Discover Research tab on the www.informalscience.org website may be helpful in finding current research, literature reviews, research agendas, etc., related to learning STEM in informal settings. Promoting innovation. Innovation may be framed in different ways and serve different purposes. Innovation may build on or extend current work, or it might take that work in a totally different direction. For the informal STEM education field, innovation might, 1, address immediate challenges and opportunities. 2, anticipate different structures, functions, and purposes of or for informal STEM education. 3, challenge existing assumptions about learning and learning environments. Or 4, envision the future needs of diverse learners, educators, and STEM professionals in the United States. Advancing collaboration. This priority has 2 aspects: leveraging partner resources and demonstrated focused, reflective approaches to building collaborations. Successful projects will generally involve interdisciplinary teams. In all cases, proposals must demonstrate and describe the expertise needed for the work, how this expertise is incorporated in the project, and who is responsible for each component. Collaborations should be integral components of the work funded. strengthening infrastructure and building capacity. Building capacity and infrastructure are critical for advancing the field of informal science education and the work we support and fund. As you look at this graphic, you'll see that there are many aspects to informal STEM learning and different sectors. Strengthening the infrastructure and building the capacity of these sectors is important to us, and we look for proposals to demonstrate their ability to do these types of things. And finally, broadening participation. The ASEL program contributes to the National Science Foundation's mission by supporting projects to engage professionals and the public, typically those from underrepresented groups in the STEM fields. Projects focused on young people, for example, can contribute to informing how the nation prepares this increasingly diverse cohort for the rapidly changing occupations in STEM-related fields. Projects focused on professionals, for example, can contribute to research on STEM learning outcomes, organizational capacity, and field-wide mechanisms for expanding access to STEM resources and experiences. ASEL is particularly interested in receiving proposals from organizations that serve underrepresented minorities. We have 2 solicitation-specific criteria for projects in which broadening participation is a primary goal. The 2 solicitation-specific criteria include: does the proposal identify the characteristics and needs of the targeted underrepresented groups, public or professional, to be served? Does it include explicit plans or strategies for addressing or accommodating the specific interests, community or cultural perspectives, and educational needs of participants of the identified underrepresented groups? Now keep in mind that these criteria are for those projects where broadening participation is a primary goal. So you will want to be explicit in how you respond to these criteria and make sure that you do, if broadening participation is a primary goal or broadening participation research. Now let's talk about ASEL audiences. We have 2 primary audiences within the ASEL program that we support: public and professional audiences. Let's begin with public audiences. As per the solicitation, these may include learners of any age, educational level, geographic, or cultural program, including those from groups underrepresented in STEM or underserved in STEM. When addressing public audiences, one should be clear about their audience and why they have selected that audience. In addition, the work proposed should be from the point of view of the audience. In other words, what needs does this work help to meet and resolve? The ASEL program is keenly interested in projects that support understanding issues of access to informal STEM learning opportunities for individuals and groups from populations typically underrepresented in STEM, people in rural as well as urban communities, adults across the lifespan, early childhood, and intergenerational and family groups. Our next audience type would be the professional audiences. This includes individuals who are involved in aspects of research or development in STEM learning by the public in informal environments. Similar to public audiences, For professional audiences, it's also important to be clear about the audience, how they were selected, how the work will meet and address and perhaps resolve the needs for the professional audience selected. Professional audiences can include STEM educators, evaluators, education and learning researchers, technologists, media professionals, or STEM professionals doing outreach in informal settings. Graduate students and postdocs may also be included as professional audiences. Very important. You may focus on public audiences, professional audiences, or both. However, please be clear about the target audience and how the project's design and STEM learning components are relevant and appropriate for the proposed target audiences and age levels. Okay. Going to take a quick look and see if we have any questions that have been proposed that may relate to the areas that were just addressed. And I'm just checking. Okay. All right. It looks like we don't have many questions at this time, so I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Catherine Eberbach, to talk about the ASEL program solicitation
and et cetera.
et cetera. So I'm going to turn it over to Catherine now. If you have questions, please continue to send them to us in the question box, and one of us will try to answer them. There are a number of you on the line right now, so we may not be able to get to all of them, but we will take a few moments at the end of the presentation to respond to as many questions as we can. So, in fact, I'll go ahead and turn it over now to Catherine.
Hi, good morning, afternoon, depending upon where you are. My name is Catherine Eberbach, and so I'm going to be, at this point, turning over the conversation to focus on the ASEL program solicitation, as well as, and that will include some of the revisions and additions that have been made to the current solicitation. And also we'll focus on project types, which I know is a big focus on a lot of people's questions, and then a little bit about research and evaluation. So as you we have been pointing out in the solicitation, there have been both revisions and additions to the solicitation. Specifically with reference to revisions, you will notice that what was exploratory pathway projects have been renamed to pilots and feasibility studies. So the difference in here is simply the difference in name, and the reason why we did that was to clarify to the field that this feasibility and pilot studies are to focus on research and evaluation for ASEL projects. But very specific, let me just be even more clear about that. As we found that the field was not really clear when we talked about pathways. This is really meant to be an exploratory project. Then there's also, we reworked the evaluation section. So if you go into the entire solicitation and you go to pages 18 and 19, includes a lot more information about evaluation and research, but specifically in this case, research evaluation. It focuses on specifically how different kinds of evaluation in terms of iterative support. Let me just step back for a second. In support of iterative development or improvement, and then also in support of accountability. Both of these evaluation types are external. Okay. The other thing, I'm sorry. The other thing is that we have also eliminated 2 supplemental documents. So specifically, in our earlier solicitation, you could include in the supplemental document section logic models, summary of summative evaluation, or additional information about the research plan. We are no longer doing that. Kind of in exchange for that, there is instead of having 15 pages for the proposal, an ASEL proposal can be up to 18 pages. The other thing is that we also have revised the conference proposals to include a small conference proposal, which will be up to $75,000. And I'll speak more about conference proposals in a moment. In terms of what's new in the solicitation, there have been some changes in terms of the limits on the number of proposals. So, and what that means is that an individual can serve as a PI or co-PI only on 3 proposals. The other limit is on organizations. So organizations may lead up to 3 proposals. So, and we can talk more about that if you have questions about that. There's also a new proposal type. Okay. There is, okay, oh, you know what? There's a new proposal type. And so this is, why is it changing? Okay, is it on timer? I don't know. Okay. So there is a new proposal type called literature reviews, syntheses, and meta-analyses. Literature reviews, these are not simply about description. A literature review doesn't just say what's already out there. These must be focused on a particular problem or construct. They should be a critique. They are different from lit reviews that are part of your proposal, which summarizes or describes the strengths and weaknesses of previous research for the purpose of establishing the findings and claims that are relevant to the proposal that you are submitting. With regard to syntheses, these are analytical and interpretations of findings from selected studies. These use deliberate processes of selecting studies with an emphasis on bringing together, analyzing, and interpreting findings across the selected studies. These syntheses attempt to interpret findings for deeper understanding of meaning across a pool of selected studies. And then, yeah, so, right, this is just, excuse me for a moment. Yeah, got it. Okay, thank you. So got it. These are so I just want to say these are general comments. And as noted on the slide, depending upon the source, some will say that these terms are interchangeable. And that is something to consider. So be sure to be clear about what you're doing and how it will advance new understanding for the field. So I'm going to talk now, turn attention to project types. Pilots and feasibility studies are exploratory development work or feasibility studies. So you can often hear about it referred to in that way. So research in service of practice, excuse me, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, we just are having a little technical problem here with the slides. So, research and service to practice projects have at their core a compelling research question about practice, about how people learn and/or about specific learning environments. And for this type of project, the most energy and effort are centered around the research. ASEL research in service to practice focuses on understanding and improving practice. Funding is up to $300,000 to $2 million for 2 to 5 years work. It's expected that they would include quantitative or qualitative data or evidence and include lit review, detailed research plan, etc. Innovations in development projects. These build knowledge through the development of innovative projects. Some of these might be exhibits or programs or other kinds of interventions or collaborations. Builds on evidence from prior practice and research, describes an explicit theory and logic model or theory of action, includes plan and process for design, development, and implementation, and includes a plan for knowledge building through research and or evaluation. Note that the funding range is from $500,000 to $3 million, and the timeline is from 2 to 5 years. We want to point this out because we want to really encourage the field to think about innovations and development at different scales of work. So there. Broad implementation. Broad implementation expands models, programs, technologies, assessments, or other advances that have documented record of success. The intent here is to expand research, reach, whether it's age, gender, geography, or some other elements. Includes a plan and process for design and development and implementation. Builds knowledge through research and or evaluation. And again, note that there is a range of funding opportunities from $500K to $3 million for 2 to 5 years. Similar to the previous solicitation, broader implementation projects build on programs, models, etc., previously developed that have been documented and have evidence establishing that they were very successful and are ready for broader implementation. Expanded reach and impact can be by age and geography, as I've noted, but special interest in reach, we have a special interest in reach for underserved and underrepresented populations. Plan for knowledge building is essential in the same way that we have talked about earlier, so in terms of both research and or evaluation. Conferences. So I related to conferences that ASEL will support are those that are related to the ASEL program goals. They focus on development of communities of practice, field advancing practice, assessments, and research agendas. The requests can be from up to, in excess of $75,000. Those that are in excess of $75,000 are due on the deadline of the solicitation. Proposals that are up to $75,000 may be submitted at any time. So ASEL invests in conferences, symposia, and workshops that help meet program goals. They build knowledge, advance the field, they develop new research agendas, improve practices. Note, the reason why we have made a distinction between those greater than $75,000 and those that are less than $75,000 is we know that we have limited funds. We want to consider all major investments, such as proposals over $75K, all at one time. At the same time, we have found that there are some small proposals that are timely, and we want to be able to be responsive to that. So there doesn't seem to be any advantage or disadvantage to when you submit a smaller proposal. Do it when it makes sense to you. So going to research and evaluation. So ASEL supports research that advances knowledge and the evidence base for practices, assumptions, broadening, participation, or emerging educational arrangements in STEM learning and informal environments, including the science of science communication. Research can be supported through these mechanisms. We've already talked about some of these. The literature reviews, syntheses, meta-analyses, feasibility studies, research and service of practice, and can be components of innovations in development and broad implementation projects. It is important for practice to inform the research as well as having research inform practice. And in that spirit, genuine partnerships between researchers and practitioners are required, such that the project is important and relevant to both research and practice. Turning to evaluation in ASEL projects. All ASEL project proposals are required to submit evaluative processes that they would employ to achieve the two goals. These are supporting iterative improvement. That is, evaluation processes should ensure that a project gets appropriate, rigorous external input throughout the life of the project. Such input is essential for project monitoring, management, and continuous quality improvement. External feedback should enrich and potentially challenge the team's perspectives. And the second part of evaluation is to promote accountability. So evaluative processes should address questions such as, is the project addressing its stated goals? What is the quality of the work? The solicitation does not intend to be prescriptive with respect to how your evaluation goals are achieved. There are some possibilities that one can use to design evaluative processes that best align with the particular project. So, for example, evaluation and knowledge building. Some projects seek to achieve ASEL's knowledge building criterion through evaluation. Others propose research studies to build knowledge and to use evaluation primarily to monitor progress against timelines, ensure fidelity, and implementation. Those are all fine. Evaluation for iterative continuous improvement. These are projects that employ iterative cycles of evaluation, such as front-end, formative, remedial, to inform work during the development and implementation of particular project activities. This is often the case for proposals submitted to the innovations and development or broad implementation project types. It may also be important for proposals submitted to other project types. External advisory boards and third-party evaluators typically contribute to the accountability component of project evaluations. These may be used to provide the project team with feedback on both as needed and or on annual basis on a range of issues, including the project's research methods and analyses, how to improve engagement with the project's target audiences, and how to effectively bridge boundaries in collaborations. The extent of evaluation activities should be appropriate to achieving the project's goals and given the project size and scope. And so now I'm going to turn this back to my colleague Monya. And
okay, thank you. Okay, so we're here at our last 2 or 3 sections in the webinar, and thank you to those who've been submitting questions. We've been trying to get to them, so please continue to do that, and we'll take a few minutes here at the end and answer some of your questions that you sent to us ahead of time, and also those that have been sent during this webinar. So keep sending them to us, and we'll try to get to them all. Okay, well, we won't get to them all, but we'll try to get to some of them. All right, so let's look at now the merit review criteria. So as some of you may know, at the National Science Foundation, we have 2 merit review criteria. We have the intellectual merit criteria, and then we have the broader impact. What you will want to know from these 2 areas is that we consider all of the elements that you see here, 1 through 5, important for both intellectual merit and also the broader impact. With regards to the first, what is the potential for the proposed activity? The advancing knowledge and understanding within its own field and across different fields is especially important for intellectual merit, but we also see value in advancing knowledge and understanding through broader impact activities. So it may be through outreach or publications, but there are also ways to advance knowledge through broader impacts. However, we generally think of broader impacts, I think, in terms of benefit to society and also the advancement of desired societal outcomes. Secondly, We're really looking for work, both in intellectual merit and broader impact, that really is creative and original. And we could even say potentially transformative, although honestly sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to get to the potentially transformative level, but certainly creative and original are aspects of both intellectual merit and broader impact that we look for in terms of our support and funding here within the ASEL program. We're looking for work that is really well thought out and organized and really is built on a sound rationale. So that rationale includes a strong case for why this work should be conducted. Why is it important? How does it build on current research or work that's already been done on the field? And how will it really bring about new understanding? We really want the plan to incorporate a mechanism to assess the success as well. The other criteria, this fourth one, is about how qualified is the team of individuals, the actual team, the institution to do the work that's proposed. And this is important both in the intellectual merit and also in the broader impact. Sometimes you need different expertise to ensure that you have the quality and the expertise that you need to cover both intellectual merit and broader impact sufficiently and also appropriately. And then finally, are there adequate resources available to the PI either at the home institution or through the collaborations? And frankly, are there resources available to conduct all the work that's being proposed, both in the intellectual merit, which is where we see a lot of the research design, the project design, a lot of that work and methodology, but then also for the broader impact. How will the project work get disseminated, communicated out beyond the work that's conducted within the actual project and research? Do you have the resources to really make this happen? As I mentioned earlier, we do have a broadening participation related solicitation specific review criteria in ASEL. So we do consider this part of our merit review within ASEL, and it is important for projects where broadening participation is a primary goal. So if your project mentions in any way that it is going to address and or include an underrepresented group or individuals from underrepresented groups, then we will expect to see that these review criteria have been addressed somewhere in the proposal. And it shouldn't be implicit, okay? So you may want to actually explicitly find a way to address these two criteria in the proposal. So let's talk about the proposal review process. So as you may know, if you've already read the solicitation, there is a proposal deadline coming in a few months, so it's going to be November 6, 2017. The current solicitation is actually going to be valid for at least the next couple of years as far as we know. So we've also listed here the proposal deadlines that are listed in the solicitation after November 6, 2017. Be sure to take a close look at the solicitation. There is some information in it that talks about the proposal review process to some extent, but not to the extent that I'll talk about here in a moment. So now that we have received, let's say that we have now received your proposal, what happens next? Well, each proposal will receive reviews by external reviewers. The reviewers will range in several areas of relevant expertise, and they'll discuss the proposal on panel. But before they meet as a panel, they will each read the proposals on their own prior to their time on the panel, where they will rate each of the proposals. The proposals will get a rating of excellent, very good, good, fair, or poor. The panels will have a discussion about, the reviewers will then have a discussion about each proposal during a time that we call the panel meeting to really discuss and review each proposal. They'll decide which ones are highly competitive, competitive, or not competitive. After the panels meet, the program officers meet to review the proposals given, or the ones that are getting a high rating or ranking, and also which ones fill gaps in existing ASEL portfolios or the ASEL portfolio in general. ASEL program officers then collectively agree on which proposals should be recommended for funding. The recommendations from the panel and the reviewers are used as an advisory input during this process. The division director then also reviews and signs off, and then the grant is made by the Division of Grants and Agreements. If a proposal is not funded, then PIs receive a letter of decline with 3 or more reviewer comments. They receive panel summaries when appropriate and comments from program officers. We're really interested in having a balanced and diverse portfolio. So it's quite a process when looking and reviewing proposals and then making decisions in terms of funding. Okay. Now we'll move on to resources, and this is our final section here before we take a few questions that you've sent to us. We'll just take a few moments here. Finally, there are several resources to consider. We will provide a few here, but do keep in mind that this list is not exhaustive, so you should consider other resources beyond what we're sharing with you today. The first resource I'm actually going to add here, it's not on our slide, but we want to stress to you that you should consider the solicitation as your primary resource. Please, please, please read the solicitation. Most of the information that you need and that much of what you heard today is actually in the solicitation. So we encourage you to take a close look at the solicitation, word by word. And in fact, we would encourage you to also look at the solicitation in great detail when you are preparing your proposal. Unfortunately, some proposals never make it to review or panel because they haven't met the basic criteria and requests that are explicitly listed and described in the actual solicitation. So please don't be one of those people whose proposal, as good as it may be, is sent back. And we call it returned without review. So please at least pass the quality control stage by reading the solicitation. Okay, now that we've gotten that out of the way, anyone interested in submitting a proposal to the National Science Foundation should be familiar or become familiar with the National Science Foundation Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide that is listed on this slide in red because it is critical and it is used throughout the entire foundation. It has great information, detailed information about our proposal and award policies and also our procedures. Everything you need to know about IRB, about budgets, all of those kinds of good details are in this guide. It's available free online. Please have a look at it. Also, do have a look at ASEL funded awards. If you go to our main NSF.gov webpage and you do a /award search, you can actually search for awards across many, many years and see what types of projects we funded. There are many different ways to actually categorize the information that you see. You can look at different subject areas, etc. So please have a look at that information. You should be fully aware of work that we funded that's similar to the work that you are proposing and are building from in the work that you are submitting to us. Okay. CASE. The Center for Advancement of Informal Science Education has an extensive website with a great deal of information and resources that can be helpful to you, especially when developing a proposal. The website is here, informalscience.org. We've also listed several websites that are helpful to you, and this webinar, by the way, has been recorded, so you'll be able to go back on your own and actually see these web addresses, so no worries there, but we do recommend that you have a look at the CASE website for more information. Other great resources. We will be having more of these live webinars and webcasts, and we highly encourage you or members of your team to listen in to the live webinars because there are program officers who are available to respond to inquiries right here live. But at the same time, know that these webinars are being recorded and they will be available both on our ASEL, our external ASEL homepage, which you can find through nsf.gov. And you go to the education link, you go to our division, and then you'll get to our ASEL page. And then also informalscience.org has good information for you. Our next webinar will be September 14th, and it will be led by CASE, and it's the how to use informalscience.org to make your case for your work and also maybe even help you to prepare your proposal, so that should be a good one. We have one on how to write a competitive ASEL proposal, and then for those of you where broadening participation will be a primary goal, you certainly want to join us for the September 22nd webinar. Do know that the webinars will be available shortly after our webinars. Each webinar, we'll post them as we go. It may take a couple of days for the webinars to be posted, but they will be posted within a short time after each webinar is conducted. So finally, we have contact information here, and we do ask that if you have a general inquiry that you send it to our email address, which is basically DRL, our division, and then ASEL, which is our program, at nsf.gov. We have program officers and staff that monitor this, this email account daily. So if you find that you have a question, then feel free to send an email there. If you have a more specific question, then you are going to want to be a little bit more detailed in your inquiry, and we ask that you use the same email address but include a bit more information. And we do allow projects to send us a brief summary if you're really looking for feedback to make sure you're headed in the right direction in terms of the ASEL program. We have several programs here at the National Science Foundation, and frankly several within the Division for Research on Learning. So sometimes it's, you may not be aware of your options. And so if you are unsure where your proposal should sit or if it would be a good fit for ASEL, then sending a 1 or 2 page synopsis may be helpful to you, and a program officer could direct the inquiry to the program officer or program within the division that may be the most appropriate. Okay, and then I should also mention, it's not on this slide, but if there's a particular program officer that you would like to contact, you can also reach out to a program officer directly. We do not advise sending emails to several program officers. Okay, and thank you for listening in with us today. We hope you received valuable information on the Advancing Informal STEM Learning program. We are now going to shift in our last 5 minutes here to respond to some of the questions that have been proposed to us, and hope that you're able to remain with us, and if not, again, the webinar will be available online soon. So thank you. Okay, first question. So we have a question about the difference between research in service to practice and then innovations in development.
Okay.
Okay, and I will turn it over to Catherine since she talked about that section.
That's right. Okay, so just a second.
Okay, so I'll just start, and then Catherine can jump in here. So one thing to keep in mind, research and service to practice, as the name indicates, there is very much about research and thinking about exploring research methodologies and design and work in ways where the research is really driving the work as it informs practice. And so in a research in service to practice project, the treatment, if you will, or the project itself. So if you're using, for instance, an after-school program as part of the setting in which the research is being conducted, there's really no expectation that that treatment is actually, I'm sorry, there's different information coming to me here. The research that's being conducted is actually through the mechanism of that setting. Whereas the innovations and development work, while it may actually involve research as well, it's much more related to the development of products or a program. Again, if I use after school as the example, so it's much more about looking at that development work in a way where we're really looking for that development work to be implemented and perhaps disseminated. Whereas with research and service to practice, you could think of the it there is more the research, and the products or the program is more an instrument to get to the research. To support the research that's being done. One is a bit more about the research, whereas the other is a bit more about the development work, but with research oftentimes as well, because we are very much a research division. Okay, hopefully that provided some clarity on the difference there. The funding mechanisms are basically the same. Innovations and development projects can be a little bit larger at $500K to $3 million, but they both can be from 2 to 5 years.
So they're asking what's the difference between excellent, the range of proposals, the range of ratings, and competitive, not competitive.
Okay, there's a question about, sorry, I'm just looking at some of the questions that have been proposed that I think would be good for a general discussion here. We've gotten several questions that seem a little bit specific, and so
I'm trying to look for something more broad.
There's a question about teachers.
Yeah.
Okay, so a question about teachers and you know, maybe STEM education. I saw it. I'm going to turn over to Catherine. But there was a question earlier about including teachers and particularly with continuing education and professional development.
Right.
How it would and how that fit into ASEL.
I think the thing that we would like to say is that just simply because you include teachers, and I'm assuming we're talking about classroom teachers rather than, say, informal education teachers, simply by including classroom teachers does not mean this cannot be an ASEL-funded project. The onus, though, will be on your argument for, one, being able to articulate what the roles of those teachers are in an ASEL project, but also where is the impact? How is the the participation of these teachers in an ASEL project proposal? How does that actually advance and inform informal STEM education? So if in reviewing your proposal and thinking about how it is, where the impact is, if the impact is back in the classroom and it's back in the formal sector, then that may not be a proposal that really is best suited to informal STEM education. At the same time, we don't really want to discourage that intersection. It is honestly a very fine boundary place that and we're trying not to make it so impermeable, but we are trying to also be respectful of how the funds are dedicated for the ASEL programs to advance informal STEM education.
Okay, so there's a question, I've seen this question a couple of times, and it's about research and evaluation, and if a project involves informal learning plus research on the design, improvement, and effectiveness of their project, does the research component count as an external evaluator? Or do we need an external evaluator in addition to a researcher? So I did see a couple of questions that were really about how evaluation plays a role with research-related questions. So we'll get that question. And then I also want to just note that we do have 30 minutes reserved, extra 30 minutes for this. So do keep sending your questions. We are planning to be here until 3:30, so do continue to send them to us. Okay, so research and evaluation. And I can respond. So the question that we had, we've a couple of them about the research and the evaluation. So we expect that most of our, if not all of our, projects will have a research component. Now, whether or not the proposal or project has an evaluation as well, that is going to depend on the project type. And we do provide some guidance in the solicitation. In fact, we revised the solicitation this year to provide even more guidance on this component with some examples of the kinds of work. Like, for instance, we now have the pilots and feasibility studies. So it may be that for some of those, it may just be the research component, but it may be that, especially if the plan is to eventually scale the project to an innovations and development project, where perhaps evaluation in terms of the actual project design and products is going to be really important for informing the work, building the case and the basis for a future innovations and development work. Well, then evaluation may need to be a part of that. Another question was about the types of evaluation that people can propose. And again, we have information about evaluation in our solicitation. But what I can tell you is that PIs have a couple of different options. So one is that that you can get an external evaluator, and we do prefer, external evaluators, but occasionally there are situations where organizations have evaluation departments or centers or teams that in all respects, or many respects, function independently of any one particular project that's going on that within that same institution. And so if the case can be made that the internal, external evaluator really can be independent and show that the level of bias would be fairly minimal to non-existent, then it's okay to have an evaluator who's actually within the same institution, but maybe in a different office or department, etc. But there is that option to get, an outside external evaluator or evaluation firm. The other option is to have evaluators on an advisory board or in an advisory capacity. The one suggestion I would make or recommendation is to make sure that if your evaluation is going to be covered by an advisory council, that you have someone with education evaluation expertise. Okay, we really want to see that someone is on the team who has the kind of depth of knowledge that's required for especially the technical methodology work that's required for a strong and rigorous evaluation. Okay? All right, so let's take another question.
Are there any restrictions on what, I'm sorry. I just left them.
Okay, we're just looking here to see if there's another question.
There are.
Okay, someone mentioned that we may have.
There is a.
Catherine has a question.
Yeah.
Go right ahead.
So I think people are getting a little bit confused, or there's some confusion around the innovations and development projects. So, and there was a question: can new projects around innovations and development, and whether or not they have to be attached to feasibility studies? And so, feasibility studies have the premise that you will be assessing some element of a project that seems to be like a bigger unknown or untested, really understudied, and you need to have some kind of piloting in order to test that idea out and develop it far enough so that you can then develop a more extensive proposal. But innovations and development does not depend upon whether you have done a pilot or feasibility study in terms of NSF funding. It assumes that in terms of an innovations and development that you are in fact building on evidence from prior practice and research. It does not necessarily mean that that prior practice and research has to have been funded by the National Science Foundation. So it does include plans and process for design in terms of the innovations and development, and but it does not necessarily mean that you have to build upon NSF-funded prior work in your own feasibility study. So if you have sufficient evidence, if you have sufficient work based upon prior research and prior program development, then in fact you should be using that evidence to make your case that this is a supportable innovations and development project.
Okay, and along the same lines, there was a question regarding recommendations for evaluators, researchers, collaborators, and we generally don't provide specifics in terms of who a project may want to work with. However, you are invited and encouraged to have a look at informalscience.org, and then you can also do an award search in the NSF database, as we mentioned earlier, to see what kinds of projects have been funded. And by doing that search, you can see some of the types of work that different PIs and institutions are engaged in, and it may provide you with some ideas of potential researchers and collaborators you may want to reach out to for your work. With regards to evaluators, several ASEL, there are many ASEL funded evaluations that are available through informalscience.org, and again, evaluators who've been involved with ASEL projects are visible on that website, so you can see people who have experience in informal STEM learning. And then there's also AEA, which is the Association for, did I say that right? The Association for Evaluation. I think I'm messing up the. But there's the association. I can't believe them. But there is the
humor everybody.
AEA there that provides. You can do a search for evaluators. Maybe it's the American Evaluation Association.
That
perhaps.
Sounds right. That sounds better.
Okay. Okay, we have a few more minutes. Let's see.
So I'm just trying to figure out this one. I'm going to try. So there's a question that goes to asking for projects focused on deliverables, and I'm assuming tangible deliverables. Will the extent of outsourcing to professional firms for aesthetic or functional design influence the likelihood of the project being funded? Again, the likelihood of being funded is that you've actually addressed the larger goals of the program, that you have addressed some of what the strategic parts of the project of the program. NSF does fund, not we, but NSF does fund the professional development and design work of a proposal if it's funded, of course, if it's awarded. So it doesn't increase and it doesn't decrease. The mere inclusion of those requests for those resources does not necessarily increase or decrease the likelihood. It actually is the full package on what is the import and the significance of that work, as well as the planning and design around that.
Okay, and then another question about funding. So there's a question about the percentage of funding that NSF will support in a project, and that's an interesting question. A lot of it depends on what's being proposed. We do have, that's why it's important to look at our policies and procedures guide. We do have very explicit information about the types of allowable costs, and so that is available, and we do have to follow those guidelines in making our funding decisions. So it is possible that there may be parts or elements of a project that may not be allowable, and so we may not fund it. There are also, it could be that there may be aspects of a proposal that may be significantly underdeveloped or just do not appear to add much to the project, and maybe there's interest in a certain particular component. So it really depends. It's really, the onus is really on the PI to make the case for the work, but also for the support that's being sought. Okay, we do not do cost sharing, so we just want you to request what you need. We do see sometimes that projects under budget, so it really does happen. So we don't want you to under budget, because then we worry that you may not be fully cognizant of what's required to do the work, and then it gets into a resources issue that maybe you don't have you won't have the resources that you need to do the work. And then the more common observation is that sometimes projects are they are over budgeted. So you want to come in exactly where you need to be based on the work that's been proposed. There was another question about applications, and do we have any strong applications, which, by the way, we refer to them as proposals, and we don't provide proposals, competitive proposals that have been funded for confidentiality reasons and other reasons. So we don't have those. What you can do certainly is to have a look at, who's received an award, and maybe somebody would be willing to share with you, but we don't provide a list of the competitive proposals or a place where you can go and see the actual proposals. Okay? All right. I'll see if my colleague has a couple of questions that she'd like to raise with you, and then if not, I think we received a few previously that we could also respond to.
There was a question about when you would get feedback on a small conference proposal. That is definitely, as we said, it's not around, you don't have to submit this on the timeline, on the regular deadline, but you would submit this at any time over a period, over the year. These tend to be, it can take a while, maybe a couple months, but you are always recommended to plan ahead on conferences because they do take a lot of time, and even when funded, to get the lead time for a conference to be organized in such a way that it is operational.
Okay. So there was a question submitted previously about a project or proposal that could fit into multiple categories. Mm-hmm. And this actually should not happen. If a proposal is really strongly suited and written, it should fit only within one of the categories that we have. So if it looks like it's fitting into more than one, then it might not be focused quite in the way that it should, or I imagine that it may not really be in one of the categories that that you may be thinking that it belongs in. And I'll give you an example with some of our pilots, some of our early work, early research type of projects. Sometimes folks are a little further along than they think, and so they really aren't in that pilot phase. They've already done several iterations and really could be at a research and service to practice level, and perhaps even the budget that's been proposed, while it may be within the budget for a pilot, the work that is proposed really looks a lot like the more advanced research or expanded research and service to practice project. So it really, in that case, it really fits in a research and service to practice instead of a pilot. If you really are unsure, this is another one of those instances where it may be worth sending a 1-page or 2-page summary to a program officer or to the DRL ASEL at nsf.com email address, and one of the program officers can have a look and just see where they think it may fit. I'll just say one other thing, and that is that placement is really important. So it's really important to try to get it in the right category. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing, and I think I said this before, is program placement is really important. We do sometimes have to turn away projects that really are about formal education. They're really looking to explore what happens during the school day. They're looking at course selection in the school day, changes, academic achievement changes, and grades and different assessments during the school day. Those to us are all projects and work that's being done within formal context, and we have programs here that really focus on formal education. For us, our primary interest is informal learning, the informal learning context, or context, if you will. Okay.
We have, so I have two questions, and one is very straightforward. So there was a question whether or not Head Start is considered formal education. Head Start can be positioned in either context, both informal and formal. Again, it depends upon the argument that you're making to support why this would be a case for ASEL to support. There's another question that was asking about the priorities. So the solicitation states that ASEL proposal should address the priorities, noting that 1 through 4 are ones that seem to make sense to that individual, and that 5 and 6 for the proposal seem more dependent upon the topic or the audience, etc. I would say that I think that you in fact could address all 6 of these in any proposal. When we think about strengthening infrastructure and building capacity, there's a lot of ways to think about that. You could be thinking about building the capacity of STEM professionals, informal STEM professionals, to carry out their work, or for organizations to work better and more productively in developing new programs or partnering with researchers and others, other informal organizations. So there's a lot of ways to be thinking about capacity building. This does not necessarily mean that we're out there building the infrastructure of highways and networks. That can be, not the highways so much, but the network certainly. NSF could support some of that work. So I think it's a matter of looking at these particular priorities and really thinking about, well, does it make sense to our proposal? Does it really help? Are we really contributing to these things? And if so, then I would emphasize those things. Okay.
Okay. All right. I have 2 questions that have been asked. One of the questions is about the number of collaborators and types. Is there a recommendation? And again, I think this is one of our kind of themes or messages we like to stress today. The first was to read the solicitation. Yes. And the second one is make the case. So you really need to make the case for the work that you're proposing, and it really spills over into pretty much every aspect of your proposal and the work. So with regards to the question about the number of collaborations and the types, I can say that you definitely want to have diverse collaborators. In other words, that are coming from different contexts to help support your work. But at the same time, I would say whoever you choose, however many collaborators you choose, you need to make the case for those collaborators being a part of the work. So we don't want to see people or organizations that appear to be a part of the work in name only. We want to actually see them being an integrated part of the work, and in both intellectual merit and broader impacts. So that's really something to consider there. So we don't have a number other than you should have a collaborator. We don't really fund projects that aren't part of some type of collaborative team, because as we found that most work requires expertise beyond just the project team. But you are encouraged to consider having collaborators that are diverse in terms of their expertise and resources and ability to leverage, build capacity, and also help with dissemination of the work. So making the case and reading the solicitation may be helpful there. Okay. Do you have a couple more?
Well,
Catherine?
I have one.
Okay.
We have lots of questions yet, but you know, we're still getting questions coming in. There's sometimes we've gotten questions about the potential for international collaborations, and there are actual specific programs within NSF more broadly that do fund quite elaborate international collaborations. What I'd like to point out in terms of ASEL, or within ASEL, the kinds of the ways in which you might include international collaboration is actually through research. So NSF cannot fund, for example, interventions done in Ethiopia or Belgium or Canada, for that matter, that are impacting students and teachers and publics in outside the U.S. Those funds actually, the NSF funds actually have to fund and support U.S. citizen or U.S. populations. That being said, NSF can support and the participation and involvement of researchers from other countries as part of an ASEL project. So if that sounds convoluted, please follow up with me. If that's really a particular issue that you have and have been considering, please follow up with me, because there are ways to do that.
Okay, and then I have a question from a new PI, potential PI, to the ASEL program, wanting to know some tips and ideas if you're new to the program. And so I've jotted down a few. Again, I would say read the solicitation and thoroughly read it. As I said, we have several different programs within this division. So if you are brand new to informal, and especially to the education directorate, or especially this division, then I really encourage you to go on the nsf.gov website and go to our division's webpage, where you can see the list of different programs, and go through the different solicitations to make sure that what you want to do fits into the solicitation that you see, or the ASEL solicitation specifically. We do find sometimes that it appears that projects are written, there people try to write them for the solicitation, and it's for our solicitation, it's really evident they belong in a different program, or should have been writing for a different funding opportunity. So try to find the program that best fits the work that you want to do, instead of going the opposite direction. I'd encourage you to start early. November will be here before you know it, and as most of you know, there are many steps and channels to get your proposals to us, the collaborations, etc. Don't rush. If you can, as you see, the solicitation will be valid for more than 1 year. So if this year is not going to be your year, then spend the time doing the due diligence, the research, building the team and the collaborations you need to prepare to write a really strong, competitive proposal. We provided several resources for you, but also consider the ASEL community a resource. There are many different places where you can connect with people who are doing work in the informal space, and you are encouraged to reach out to some of those folks, especially those who've already been successful in being supported by this program. I'm going to also encourage and just say that, for sometimes it's good to start small. A lot of new PIs sometimes come in with really large ideas and expectations and budgets, and and the like without really thinking deeply about what they really want to do and how they want to do it and getting the team together. And sometimes you actually need to start a little smaller and pilot the work and really build that evidence base before moving to the bigger projects. And that's how some of the more competitive, especially larger grants, that's the process they use. A lot of them started as pilots or feasibility studies. They've really been working in those particular different spaces for some time. So I'd encourage you to do that. Two other things. We do have our deadline. So don't forget the deadline. We don't extend the deadline unless there's some kind of natural disaster, and I'm not even sure that those qualify, but make sure you don't miss that. We always get little notes afterwards, and we have to tell them no, we can't extend it. And please see our webinars. We have several webinars coming up, including one on writing a competitive proposal. So please, please take a look at that. And hopefully these tips are actually helpful for anybody that's considering submitting a proposal to us either in this round or a future round. So we are right here at the end of our time. We're going to go ahead and close up for today and just say thank you again for your time. We hope this was helpful. Please go visit our external ASEL website that you can access through nsf.gov and also informalscience.org to see future webinars, as well as the opportunity to register for those webinars and our archived recording of this webinar and future webinars as they are posted. Do give us a few days to get the material posted, but it will be there. And should you have any questions, do let us know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.